think we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to welcome everyone here. You are at the session for ensuring that data underlying the publications are sustainable, fair, care, and trusted, or the Repo to Pub working group working session. And so now's your opportunity to take off if this is not what you intended. And we'll try and keep you engaged and excited so that nobody falls asleep after lunch. And we welcome you to this session. We hope that this will be a little introduction for those of you who haven't heard this session of the working group before. We hope to introduce the goals and objectives, and then maybe pick your brain a little bit about some necessary next steps that we have to move our working group forward. My name is Danny Kincaid. As soon as I can advance the slides. Okay, so here's our agenda. Gonna welcome you all. Check that one. Give you an introduction to the working group, the goals, and the work plan. We were intending a breakout working session, but given the number of folks both online and in the room, we may forego the breakout groups and have a group discussion to kind of brainstorm some of the needed information that we hope to leverage to finish the goals and objectives of the working group. And then that would have had a report out and next steps. So we'll play it by ear here, see if we garner a few more folks online, but we may just have a group discussion. Okay. So introduce you to working group co-chairs. I'm Danny Kincaid. I'm coming from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in the US up in Massachusetts. I am joined in the room by my co-chair, Natalie Rea of University of Arizona. Let's see, do we have Matt online? Maybe, maybe not. Matthew Wark is with Taylor and Francis as publisher, and Leslie Wyborn of Australian National University. Okay. Should I put it on? Okay. I have turned. Yeah. Can folks online hear me now? Let's see. How about now? Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay, let me see if I can back up now. Little tune. It just played a little tune for me. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that noise is. Okay, but now I don't know if they can hear me. Can you still hear me? Yes. I had that. Yes. Did that. I still don't know what that. Can you guys hear me now? You hear the music.
We hear you.
Okay. Can you all still hear me? Let's see. Okay. Thanks, Allison. Ah, yes. How do I turn that test off? Okay. Ah, okay. Yes. Yes. All right. All right, let's try this one more time. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. Okay. So now we're gonna start back up here. All right. Always fun with tech. Good. All right. As long as everyone can still hear, we're gonna keep moving on. Okay. So let's introduce you to the goals and objectives and the driver behind the working group. This came about because of an emerging problem that's driven by the need for researchers to publish their data that's connected to their scholarly publication. And by going to a repository, particularly a discipline-specific repository, to deposit their data in time for the peer review process to happen and the publication process to happen, the repository needs to do some work with that data. Those workflows between the journal moving the scholarly publication forward and the repository trying to publish the data that underpins that scholarly publication, those two workflows do not match up. And this causes friction in this whole entire data and scholarly publication workflow. So publishers are increasingly required requiring that data that's cited in the publication is recognized in a repository. This is forcing the author to deposit in a repository and get that DOI. The timing is mismatched. And so that's causing a lot of friction and consternation and putting a lot of pressure on the researcher authors. And this is primarily because there's little awareness and communication across these stakeholder groups. So repositories don't have a mechanism for reaching out and talking to publishers. The author gets stuck in the middle of this situation and everybody's frustrated. So, and this great schematic is trying to illustrate visually this problem. Domain repositories, they provide an important role. We want to make sure if the data has a repository that can help in curating it, and that's disciplinary, that it goes to that disciplinary repository. We're not saying that there is no role for general repositories. We're saying we'd like to see the data, if it has a specific disciplinary repository, end up there. Now, for the scholarly publishers, they're challenged to work across many journal portfolios. One publisher may have hundreds of journals, and they have existing operational workflows. They need solutions that they can scale across multiple journals to help authors, but also not interrupt their own workflows. So it's a challenging landscape, and we've been working on this for a little while. And we think what we need is consensus across these stakeholders and coming to an agreement on a common frame of reference for what both of these workflows look like and what the optimum situation would be for every stakeholder. And so, the current situation here in the gray on the left, the hopeful, positive outcome situation on the right. And this illustration kind of hits home about why we want to see those data go to a domain-specific repository if one exists. So we have our generalist repository kind of capabilities down here in the lower left, but as you move into more domain repositories, they get into the I and the R of FAIR that make those data reusable. And so it adds value to the data that underpin the publication. And we want to make sure that people who find data in these publications can go and use these data efficiently. Current situation, however, is not that. A lot of data is not making it into disciplinary repositories. This is a graph out of some work by Stahl and Raunvelder and Stahl, excuse me, 2024. Not published. We can't find it. We have access to this wonderful graph that that shows that yes. Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Authors encounter data publication requirements during paper publication. They're challenged to determine what a best repository is. They're also pressed for time because domain curation takes time. The publishing of the scholarly paper happens faster than domain curation. So they're under pressure and they tend to dump their data into a generalist repository. So this graph is just illustrating the dichotomy in that disciplinary versus generalist. So what happens? Those high value long tail data are not well curated and they're not as fair as they could be. So how can we help here? We started this work a while ago and we came up with some general guidelines of what we feel would ameliorate or mitigate the situation. Journals can help authors select appropriate repositories, and there's work going on in the RDA space now to do that, to find the appropriate repository, give authors a sense of timing before they submit their paper on how long they will have until the journal needs that dataset DOI. Provide information to repositories on the use of share links that would help peer reviewers access and review data as it validates and for veracity of the results finding in the publication. And then details about when the repository makes the data public, the paper is being accepted, the DOI is needed for the data, basically timing of all the things that happen on the journal side. Because right now that's entirely opaque, sometimes to the author, many times to the author, but definitely to the repository. Then on the repository side, we can enable the peer review, the paper peer reviewer to confidentially, so often requested, confidentially access the data that underpin the paper. Some journals even have double-blind peer review, and that's something that we would see how far repositories are capable of supporting that. And then provide the assurance and commitment from the repository that the peer reviewer identity will be kept confidential. Obviously, that's sort of the criteria of the peer review, but enabling confidentiality and peer review of those data as it's going through the review process, as the publication is going through the review process. So we've been at this for a little while, kind of started to discuss it in the US among geoscience repositories and found that a lot of repositories were having this similar problem. We started socializing this more and more. Unfortunately, it started sort of during COVID, so it was really hard to get momentum going. We've been putting this in the Earth and Space and Environmental Science Interest Group through RDA that is now sort of morphing into a community of practice. But we started to really gain traction there. And so just this year, we applied for a working group, moving from an interest group to a working group, or a BOF to a working group. And so lo and behold, this past August, we were endorsed and official, and now we're hitting the ground running. So kind of distilling the value proposition from our case statement, we want to ease the repository bottlenecks, facilitate peer review of the data underpinning the scholarly publication, and increase transparency for the authors of both sides of these workflows. So we're going to hopefully bring together the publishers, the repositories, possibly funders, all the relevant stakeholders, build on extended work that has already happened in the RDA space and COPTIS, and establish this common understanding for all those stakeholders involved here on the workflows and how to optimize them by reaching consensus and recommendations. So our objectives specifically are to establish a shared understanding of this Earth, space, and environmental science repository requirements, how those repositories are dealing with data embargoes, provisional data sets, the journal review process, what is working well, what's not working well, what would be the optimal situation. You get that? And then establish a shared understanding of the journal needs for the data availability and the citation and preferred timing of all of these things. What's the current data publishing policy across different publishers? What's happening in the practice? What's working well? What are the challenges that need to be solved? How do we make it easier for the publishers to work with repositories? So another objective is to educate and inform all of the stakeholders on these workflows, the touch points between them, and to create finally a set of recommendations that we can distribute to the stakeholders, the author, the journal, the repository, on how to ease these workflow frictions. So basically we're gonna, this nice bright blue cog and these nice little belts that are moving through all of these workflows, we're gonna streamline that. Who are our target adopters, our target stakeholders, repository managers, and we plan to reach these folks through policies, guidelines, educations, facilitated through existing organizations that we know are direct lines of communication. So the U.S. Council of Data Facilities, the Earth and Space Science Information Partners, Research Data Alliance, the World Data System is going to be a key player here to reach repositories. And then, of course, societies like AGU and EGU, and hopefully JPGU. For the journal and publisher and editors, through journal policies, author guidelines, and author education facilitated by publisher societies and other societies of practice like AGU, EGU, and the Coalition on Publishing Data in the Earth and Space Science, or COPTIS, we hope to reach several publishers. And then secondarily, we might be able to vet all of this with users, researchers / authors, and funders. So what does that look like? We're on the clock now since August. And so we're trying to hit that 1 to 6 month milestone right now. And that's to document a set of use cases that demonstrate repository workflows right now and the bottlenecks in the publication process. And we also hope to do this for both these repositories and the publishers. Months 6 through 12, we're going to create this generalized visual model of what a publication workflow looks like for both journals and repositories. And then 12 to 18, months 12 to 18, create that set of recommendations and distribute those to the stakeholders, primary stakeholders of journals and repositories. So that's those are the goals and the objectives of the working group very generally. And I want to pause here before we start to go on, because I just want to see if you have engaged with the working group since it started, could you please raise your hand if you were aware of the working group? Okay, so most of the room, this is new to you. So what we were hoping to do, and maybe this is where we're going to pivot and shift a little on the fly here, was to have breakout groups that are representative of our primary stakeholders. And so I see that we actually have quite a few folks online now, which is wonderful. And so maybe we'll take a moment to figure out how we pivot here. Do we want to do an online working group? Oh, Matt made it. That's wonderful. Great. I think that would be wonderful. Yeah, I think that's great. So after minor powwow up here, what I think would be helpful for us right now, does anybody have any questions with the goals and objectives first before we go on and we start asking opinions of you or asking ideas of you? Does this make sense to everyone? Does anybody have a certain scenario they can relate to that or are connected to one of these stakeholder groups? Like, are you a repository or a publisher? I know one person who is a little of both. Yeah. So what we're hoping to do here is at this stage that we're at to try and figure out these appropriate questions to dig into the problem statement, the what's causing the friction on the publisher and the repository side. We initially thought we would use a very common tool called a use case template. And we started off with this use case template to have the publishers fill out a use case template and to have the repositories fill out a use case template. And we quickly realized that that tool wasn't going to be the best tool to get at the questions we needed to ask. So we're sort of in this transition stage right now of trying to figure out what those questions are that would get the necessary information out of those stakeholders. What are the challenges you're having? Do you have a data policy right now? Is it being followed at a publisher level? Is it being followed by the authors? Where do you need the data set DOI in the timing of your publication? Those are the types of questions we're looking for either side of the stakeholders. So repositories, we have a set of questions, and journals or publishers and editors, we had a set of questions. And I think we've decided that the use case tool wasn't appropriate for us. So now we're trying to move on to what are the appropriate questions that describe the challenges. Martina.
Yes, thank you, Martina. So we have a comment. I'll just read the comment. At some point, it may be useful to have authors as one of the stakeholder groups. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And certainly, I think it's fair to say that in this work, we are coming from we are staying grounded in the author point of view. So we're always keeping in mind that the reality of what authors are facing, and then trying to work with the stakeholders that they're engaging with during data publication and paper publication to mitigate that. But certainly, I think talking to authors specifically is a great point. We have another comment coming in. Repository can issue a draft DOI while the manuscript is being reviewed and publish it later. DOI doesn't change, but it becomes findable once it's published. Yeah, exactly. So these are the types of, this is exactly the type of thing that we're interested in learning from each of our stakeholders, hearing from the repository side, how many repositories are doing that? What challenges are they finding technically or maybe socially with that? Where are the gaps in awareness of that between the publishers and repositories?
Yeah, and I would love to respond to that comment. And as a repository manager myself, we've often toyed around with this idea of a draft DOI. And the challenge that we run into is when you give an author a draft DOI, they assume their job is done, and they take that DOI and they go to the journal and they never come back for the domain curation. And so you lose that opportunity for FAIR. If that's all we needed was the DOI, everybody would put their data in a generalist repository. And so we lose that opportunity frequently for disciplinary curation. So from my standpoint as a repository, I'm challenged to just make that the answer because we have had that happen. And I see we have a hand in the room. So Kirsten.
I have several comments to make. First is on your statement just now. We do review links too, but everything has to be ready. And of course, we face the problem that the researchers usually. Oh, sorry, I'm Kirsten Elger from GFZ, running GFZ Data Services, one of the domain repositories for geosciences. Yeah, sorry. And so usually the researchers come too late. So they say, oh, I've submitted the paper, it has been rebounced, what can we do? I usually try to be very kind and make it very, very happy, hoping that the next time they will remember and come a bit earlier. And over the years, it happens. So we do not provide a review link before the curation is not ready. So that is something that definitely can overcome that issue. For I fully agree with the necessity to make closer links between the publishers and the authors and the repositories. But I would not take out the responsibility of the authors completely, because they have to really understand what it means and they have to actively contact the repository. It would be extremely helpful, and I know one publisher who's doing this, that publishers just do a careful typesetting and they just click on all the DOI links, and as soon as, and there's, I know HU journals do this and Copernicus journals do this. So when they find a DOI that is not yet registered because the authors have forgotten to inform the repository, they must not go to accept the paper. And this is the largest incentive you can get.
Yeah, I think that's great. I totally agree with that. And I love that the education process is happening. And I think that funders have a role in here as well. So we work, and most people know the repository I work with, BecoDemo. It's in the oceanographic discipline, and it works closely with the National Science Foundation. And we have been talking to our funders about this problem, and they aren't sort of, I don't know if the right word is scot-free, but they have a role in here as well to help at the time of funding for these projects to nudge and encourage their PIs to deposit their data early prior to the manuscript submission so that we can get a jump on that. So I agree. I think it's a slow cultural change in education. And I see there's another question in the room.
And I just wanted to briefly make sure that we bring in the folks from online. Francoise, I see your comment that you're coming from the astronomy community, from a repository that's well engaged with disciplinary journals. And you say, I am here an observer. I think I actually would say that we really need you in this work, similar to GFZ. The people who are doing some of these, who do have advanced work in this space, who are providing these provisional DOIs, who are do have existing mechanisms for review, giving reviewers access to data sets. We really need your examples and an understanding of what you're doing, because we have repositories that are all over the place right now in terms of advancement there.
I can say something. Do you hear me?
Sure, thank you.
François Genova speaking.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, I have to check how things are going by these days in the repository, but we have been doing this kind of things since the journals have been online in the 1993, 94, to put online data which is attached to journal papers. So I think that you have to discuss in your own context, because we have few journals. I think it's different. We have disciplinary standards and we have few journals. But I am glad to comment, and at some point I can explain how we do during one of your meetings. But the case is different, I would say, because we have not many journals, and we have disciplinary standards which provide fairness for when they are implemented.
I think that would be wonderful, Francoise. And I think that astronomy is well ahead of a lot of other geosciences. So we would love to learn from you.
I'm Maria Schatz, NHS. I come from the biomedical field, and well, I fully agree with what Kirsten just said. The journals have all the means to press authors into preparing the submissions, data submission ahead of time. You just put it in your guidance to authors, that's what you have to do, and maybe have a checkbox that the author acknowledge that they read and understand that's what's required. However, I had several conversations with publishers in my field. One of them actually is funded by my own institution. And some have hesitancy about the, so to speak, business model. Like, they're not extremely interested in pushing this forward. They think that might make the authors willing to go to another journal.
So within the Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences, we were also very concerned about that. What Kirsten was just talking about is there's a coalition on publishing data in the Earth and Space Sciences that involves all of the publishers, and might even the large ones would overlap into the biomedicine. Matthew's on here from Taylor and Francis, who was part of the signatory group, and then all the societies. And we got every single journal in the Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences, except for one petroleum journal, who was a holdout, imagine. And the same concern was there, that if we implemented a requirement that was difficult for an author, that they would then shop around for another journal. So by signing the commitment statement, we implemented all the way around the whole journal community. Now, that didn't go as perfectly as it sounds. It's hard to implement, and so I have one of the hats that I wear is there's 24 journals in AGU Society. I'm from AGU. Probably should introduce myself. Okay, hello. And we never let an author go. Like, no matter what the situation is with the data, we will work with the author so they don't shop around. We have trained our editors on how to navigate some of the challenges. And as Kirsten was saying, even though it's not optimal, the first time an author publishes, when they come back, they're more prepared. So yes, I agree with you that it is a serious issue, but there are ways to address.
We have one. Do you have something? That was Shelley Stahl from AGU. Yeah. We're bouncing between the making sure our online viewers have an opportunity to speak. So Sion Young, if you want to unmute and speak, thank you for being here.
Thank you. So I'm a senior software scientist working in data management sharing services at Beckham Medical Library at WashU, and we curate data for our institutional data repository called Digital Commons Data Becker. And because of the new policy and requirement, we get a lot of requests to deposit data to provide DOI for to the publishers. And that's what I said, we can generate draft DOI. We haven't had a chance that actually they did not go through the process of publishing it, but I do see the point of, publishers might never check. And we've seen a case where they didn't even bother to check the DOI is accurate. I've seen a wrong DOI, and they don't make sure the data set is actually published and the DOI is findable. So I think a lot of things can improve if publishers take the responsibility to check the data set is actually findable through DOI, not just getting a DOI. So that's the point I was trying to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that point. I will say that, so I was representing Repo to Pub at a conference in August in Chicago, Goldschmidt Geochemical Conference. We had a roundtable of editors there from all kinds of journals for Earth and Space Science, and they talked about the challenge because it's unclear within the publisher side of where this falls. And so a lot of those editors were saying that they themselves were having to go, they wanted to do their due diligence and do that work. But a lot of confusion and time issues of how do you get reviewers to add one more thing to do? How do editors make sure that this check has been done? How do you fit this within the software that publishers have that operationalize these things? But yeah, really important point.
Hi, Kira McNeese, Cambridge University Press. I've been enrolled for almost 6 years now, trying to get journals to implement policies. Like, it's not quite as easy as just saying put it in the author guidelines, unfortunately, is what we find. There's all sorts of hurdles to actually getting the DOIs checked, finding out who's responsible, even saying something as simple as to our typesetters, if you see data availability statement, tag it with this in the metadata. Now, I've seen many cases of journal articles where there's a section in the methods called data, and that's been tagged as a data availability statement. So like there's all these kind of processes and QA checks and a bunch of work that has to go in, and societies hate increasing turnaround times. So that's one of the big things that people push back on as well. We have seen, similar to you in the Earth and Space Sciences, we've seen in political science, there's been a huge push towards better transparency and reproducibility. All of our political science journals, they require people to put all of their data and code into Dataverse, and it all gets checked. But that's also something that came from the community, and it was because of community consensus that was able to work. Because there were those concerns about going to other journals, and yeah, for communities that don't already have that agreement or support for this sort of thing, it's really hard to make it happen. I've been trying. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, and it's just fled from my mind. Oh yeah, so in terms of like connecting and what the publisher process is, anything that you can do to like integrate into things like Scholar One, Editorial Manager, all those peer review management systems. I know Dryad now has an integration with Editorial Manager that makes it, yeah, a lot easier. So anything like that that can help send metadata back and forth when people are submitting to various different places would be a huge time saver, would help reduce errors, you know. So that's one of the things that maybe repositories and publishers can work together on. Sorry, that was a lot of different things, but I do have something to say, and then I want to ask about. So I think that's one of the things we heard, that the publishers and the specific journals, they have these existing commercial workflow applications, and whatever we decide needs to fit in there, because they're not going to invest in developing something new. They want a solution, and I think that there could be answers in there, like you're talking about. What we need to see how the generalist repositories are doing those integrations, so that if that's an easy low-hanging solution for disciplinary repositories, maybe that's a one way forward. So I think we need everybody's comments. Terms. Sorry. Yeah, just again, the experience of political science, even when there's the will, there's a huge amount of manual work, emailing back and forth between editors, between reproducibility staff, between all that, like, which is all done manually, and it's a huge, problem.
I can also do it. I can also be fast. No. Yeah. Uwe Schindler from Pangea. So we are also a repository with a lot of community-specific data. So actually, to the last part with the journals. So actually we had, I think in 2020 or 2021, we already started with Nature Scientific Data to have something like a cooperation, and it was a little bit limited, but it still works. So actually some email address of Pangea was included in the editorial system. So at least we got a status update, something whenever something happened in the review process. For us, it was very, very important, because on our side, we also want to have the DOI of the journal article, and people never came back to us and informed us their article was published, and because the name changed or something like that, title changed, it's impossible to figure out what the correct article is. So that helped a little bit. So this might also be a good idea, because it does not cost too much on the side of the publishers to somehow add an email address on the side of the repository. You need some regular expressions, whatever, to figure out what's really going on in those human readable mails. But that's one possibility, which might be a good idea. And otherwise, I'm fully agree with her. So we are also only sending review links when the data was already curated. And the other problem is also with the DOI, of course, we're also giving only out a citation that can be copy-pasted in the papers in the last step when the article is more or less ready. And nowadays, we also include the DOI, which is not yet minted in that citation, but still people get it wrong and just put in the plain review link in it. So we have seen review link. We also have seen links to the issue tracker with the data. So very, very funny thing. So it would really be important that the journals should check in their technical review phase that all the DOIs are working. So Shelley and I, we had a paper about that. So hopefully this happens soon. So.
Okay, Kirsten again. I would like to comment on something you said, Kira. I hope I got it. It was very fast. No worries. That you said you have issues with finding the data in the paper. I think in the geosciences, and this was really mainly a result of COPDES, it was then possible to properly cite the data and bring it in the reference list. And in every paper we have, there's a data availability statement where you have to put the DOI. So this is what we are teaching, I think, people. And if you go to the data policy of Springer Nature, they have added a section I was really impressed about. This is how you properly cite the data. And I think this would release you for much work, because you don't need to track down the data, because it is already the reference list. And what I'm usually saying, but because I have personal contact with my researchers, I say, you have to put it in the reference list, because this is the only place where any citation metrics can find it. And they say, oh, because then, having a DOI string somewhere is just lost. And it's a matter of educating people, and we have to address it from all sides, but we should promote the proper citation of data, because the data citation with the DOI provides you with a real citation. And this should be promoted far beyond the geosciences, because then it can become an overall thing.
There's wonderful, and Matt, I know you're waiting to speak as well. These are wonderful comments and ideas, and even brainstorming on solutions. And one of the things we hope to do here is break apart into groups and capture some of this. And maybe that's a more effective way, because right now there's a wonderful conversation happening in the chat and in our room right now. And I think if we can move into maybe one or two groups, and the online folks can have a breakout room too. We have prepared some of these questions that we started with, but certainly are by no means, written in stone. And we would love to hear feedback from everyone based on their own perspectives and ideas. And so what I hope is, Matt, I'll let you speak because you've been waiting, and I apologize for that. And then what we're going to do is kind of move into this this next activity. Does that sound good? Okay. Oh, so go ahead and unmute, Matt.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Matt Wark. I'm the Geoscience and Paleontology Journals Portfolio Manager at Taylor and Francis, one of the co-chairs. Now, I just wanted to follow up on some of the fantastic comments that have been made. Particularly, I think, Kira, I completely agree with a lot of what you were saying there. I think that's what and there's another comment in the chat by Alison. There are groups of and consortia of publishers that have already started working on what we need to do internally to map out all of the various checks and processes and workflows and staffing that we need to be able to do this. It's sometimes, I think it's sort of assumed that there's sort of like, Taylor and Francis, all journals work in a certain way, all journals work the same way. And I'm sure it's the same at Cambridge University Press and Elsevier and everywhere. And it's not like that. And so we have to proceed, journal to journal, editor to editor, author community to author community. So we are looking to connect with groups like Tier 2, for example, that have done an awful lot of work across their various pilots, mapping out all the different elements of this. So that's fantastic to see in the chat, and I'm sure we'll be following that up with various folks from there. And I also want to agree with your technical point about, integrating this into the common submission systems that we use, like Editorial Manager, Scholar One. I think this is going to be really an important consideration. And if we can get maybe some input into from some of these kind of platform companies and software companies, that would be fantastic. But of course, as we know, that sort of also depends on each publisher's individual relationship with those platform providers. It's again differences, but hopefully there are general trends that we can act on. So thanks.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, one last while we're gonna try and organize folks into a couple breakouts, maybe folks online into one, and then half the room and half the room. And while we're queuing that up, I'm gonna.
So just to follow up on all these points that we said, but journals are for profit organizations, and we ask them to do more work for no more subscription money, hopefully, right? And what is their interest in doing that? I can see that it will provide, it will generate beta quality publications, but what is the carrot for journals? And maybe one thing, one idea that I have, maybe a professional society or scientific societies can promote the journals that have very detailed and careful approach to the data publication with recommendation. Maybe journals can, societies can encourage their members to publish there, something like that. But like they have no real interest in doing that.
Thanks for that comment. How you doing? Sorry, Kira again. I will speak slower this time. I got excited last time. Yeah, just to echo everything that Mark was saying on the call. Yeah, we have a huge diversity of processes across our journals, and it's not as simple as just saying, just do one thing. We do also have a lot of guidance on our website about how to use a data availability statement, how to phrase it, like what to put in it. All of our journals now link out to that guidance. Doesn't mean people follow it. Even in the journals that do, in theory, mandate data availability statements, unless you have the manual checks and people confirming, they don't always happen. But yeah, so I just wanted to echo all of those things and say, I mean, not all of us are for profit actually, but even then it's very difficult for me to say why we should put resources into this when the benefit is good science, but you can't put a number on that. You can't quantify what the return on investment is. All right, we challenged people with work and we're losing our audience.
No, I think I would like to contradict a little what you say. And I'm really unhappy when I hear that publishers just want to make more. That is the case, that they might ask, why should I put additional effort in making data transparent and visible? Because this is all a way how to teach them that science is not just publications. And yeah, okay, good, thanks. No, because I think that's why, and if you look at the list of signatories of COPTES, you'll find 42 signed signatures, including all the major publishing houses. There are two I'm aware of that are not signed, and that is MDPI, we might guess the reason why, and the Royal Society London. But all the others, including Science, Nature, Elsevier, EGU, HU, they're all signed, and they all made the steps to make it visible. So yes, they are willing to change their workflows. And looking into Scholix, they even now put the citations in the machine-readable metadata that it can be cross-referenced. Some journals, of course, have to work on how to do this. I've just discovered that ESSD has made a major issue. Maybe what Shelley also told us last time, but they are willing to support this movement. That's what I want to say.
I'm not saying there is no goodwill. That maybe was not the careful wording from me. But it costs money. And they earn a lot of money. So I don't know, maybe if they earn a lot of money, let's go for that. I don't know what the profit margin of the journals, to be honest. But we see that it's happening in
Okay, so I think what we're going to try and do here, because everybody is still having these great conversations, and I think that what would be really helpful to capture all this and no longer sharing. So up on the screen, hopefully the online folks are seeing the goals here. And the breakout notes. And Alex, can we get the online people to just kind of powwow in make a breakout group for just everyone online so that, oh, that's great. We can just mute them. Perfect. Right. And so what we'd like to do is capture all these thoughts in our breakout group notes. And hopefully the online folks, we're figuring out the details now. Thank you for your patience, online people. So I think what we're trying to work out here is we're going to mute. When I go there, that's it. But those are the questions, but that's only for one breakout group. Is that right? Ah, perfect. I see. Okay. Notes document, there is a list of seed sort of questions that we were kicking around ourselves in the working group for both repositories and for publishers and for editors. So these are things to dig into and think about. And then we have below that, we have two breakout groups. One for the folks in the room here and one for which we will take notes for, and one for those in the Zoom space. And so what we can do is just add to this document. Folks online, you'll be able to discuss yourselves and reference those questions up there and help us brainstorm and capture the conversation that you have with an eye to what are the types of questions we should be asking of publishers and of repositories to basically ease this workflow challenge.
And I just want to give just brief context. What we are wanting here is for the group to collectively think about what types of information do we need from each stakeholder. Danny referenced earlier that we're in a transitionary phase for the working group right now in the method by which we're going to collect that information. It may look like a survey. It may look like semi-structured interviews coming down the line. We don't yet have that method settled. Right now, we're just focusing on what information is essential to get from each of these stakeholders. And so we have those seed questions in the document. Feel free to pull those down into your breakout groups notes. If you think, yes, this is super important, pull that down, copy, paste, edit, and just do so in your either in-room breakout section or in the Zoom breakout section. We'll give a 5-minute warning when we come back together. Oh. We end it too, yeah. So we will come back in 20 minutes, 15 minutes. We'll come back in 20 minutes. We'll give you a 5-minute warning. Thank you. feel free to unmute and have your conversations and just make sure that you're recording in the Zoom breakout section of the notes. Thank you.
Hello. I think we can speak here in this meeting.
Hi, I would just Petra ten Hopen speaking here from the UK Polar Data Centre at British Antarctic Survey. I would just like to very briefly follow on the conversation we had online about the Zenodo. It is completely true that Zenodo is not the worst, and don't get me wrong, they are really good for some things like raw data or reports or snapshot of a code, but to submit a high quality observational data product on Zenodo, I think seems to be a little bit of a waste. And the reason being, I think that is because Zenodo cannot possibly contain within the infrastructure all the domain-specific standards that all the domain repositories require. So it's difficult for them to implement what the domain repositories do automatically have. Otherwise, that would not be otherwise the core function of them. So that is the problem, because then obviously their barrier for depositing data is much lower, and a lot of people are taking that shortcut, and then that makes it more difficult to then integrate the data from Zenodo with higher aggregators or make them more interoperable or reusable. So I would just like to hear opinion of others on this. It would be nice. Thank you.
Does anyone want to add a thought there on that?
Hi, here's Petra ten Hopen from UK Polar Data Centre at British Antarctic Survey. I would just very briefly like to follow up on the discussion we had on Zenodo. Well, I understand that Zenodo is not the worst, and don't get me wrong, they have a very good role in, for example, publishing field reports or raw data or snapshot of a code. But publishing a high quality observational data product on Zenodo seems a little bit hiding the product away, because Zenodo cannot possibly integrate in their infrastructure all the domain specific standards that the domain repositories do have as the core function. Therefore, their depositing threshold will be always, their demands will be always lower than the domain specific repositories. And yeah, some researchers will take the shortcuts and just dump their data there. So that's, I think for us, that is a little bit of an issue. I would like to hear opinion of others. Thank you.
No, I think that's a very important point, and I think that's why, as a working group, we have taken more of the focus towards trying to improve the barriers that exist between domain-specific repositories and publishers, as opposed to generalist repositories. We are very interested in the generalist repositories standpoint, but I think we're sort of leaning a bit more about trying to understand, exactly what you're saying there about all the various different requirements that domain-specific repositories have and how journals can incorporate, integrate with them a little bit better. I think yeah, you're right. I think that that depositing in a place like Zenodo, because it has to be wider and general in scope, it is going to have that lower sort of requirements compared to a domain-specific repository. But then I think you sort of start to encounter issues of scale, particularly with publishers. And I think sometimes why publishers lean towards default repository, generalist repositories by default, is because then they can scale that across multiple journals rather than the kind of quite intricate process of matching individual journal workflows with individual domain-specific repositories. Can be done, but it's difficult, and it's not as straightforward as you would think. So yeah, I can see why authors go for it as well, because it's not just about hiding. Sometimes it's just about simplicity as well. But that's why we want to try and improve the links between journals and domain-specific repositories for exactly the reasons you're saying.
Hi, are you
Hi.
listening me?
Yes.
I was writing on the chat late, early, but I think that what a challenge is also the ethics of the authors and ethics of the publisher, because some of them the authors has to for example, a journal has to the author that they have to publish the data. They put the data in whatever repository, but they don't validate if they can publish the data, if they have the rights to publish it, or if they have sensitive data or issues like that. And for the other hand, the publisher, as we already talked about, they don't go to the data and look if they are good data or the final data. For example, for the researcher, they only saw that they have the DOI, the DOI or the URL, and they think that is okay. So it's a problem that it has to start to, I don't know, incentivate the ethics of the person, that they have to promote that the data are fair, are trust, are care, all those things that already know.
Sorry, I'm listening and typing. Yeah, no, really important point. I think, one of the things that we want to take from this is, Natalie mentioned there was a roundtable at Goldschmidt. I wasn't there, but I've heard about it. It was a geochemistry meeting that was in Chicago earlier this year, where editors were also talking about this strain. So you've got authors being held, having to essentially, as you say, like police the ethics and police the quality of the data with the journals, and then also the second rung of that, in many publishers, that's being left to editors. I think that's why we're so keen to integrate with some organizations like Tier 2, which is a major consortia of academics and publishers, trying to map out the processes that the journals need to conduct to do a better job of taking some of that work off of authors and editors, and having it done by journal staff. It's not as easy as you might think, and it has been it's been a huge focus for that group for a couple of years now. So but it's a really important point, and I think it's one that many publishers are working actively to try and address. I wonder if we could maybe get some thoughts on the questions that we have within the Zoom breakout chat. So we have 3 sort of questions that we've been asked to sort of feedback on. So those are: what are the challenges faced by each stakeholder as it relates to data publication? What are the solutions has everyone got access? If you haven't got access to these shared notes, by the way, let me know. I'm happy to type for the group, but it'd be great to get your feedback in these areas. So as I say, what are the challenges faced by each stakeholder as it relates to data publication? What solutions are needed to mitigate these challenges? What stakeholders are needed to implement each solution? And which repositories, particularly at this stage repositories, should we engage with? So let me just like reshare this link to the document that I'm talking about in the chat. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any or all of those points. Just going to move these up.
Hi, Matthew. If I can add something. It's
Yes,
Irena here from Social Science Data Repository.
Hi.
And one of the things that I put in chat is some work that we did in the past in Europe with the consortium of all the repositories. It's what we see as an issue, because we had prepared many of the guidance and shared many of the journal editors, is one thing is, it takes time until the guidance actually get accepted in the journals, because in smaller journals, this will take like 2 years, basically until it's reviewed, until everyone is agreed, etc. But what I put in as a comment, and what I think is a major problem, is that many of journals are basically working on a low budget, especially if you are thinking of smaller journals, national wise. They actually only have budget for really publishing, for some kind of editorial roles. Not even, most of the editors are working for free. So it's kind of always a challenge, what is actually the work that you can give, to the editors or reviewers to even say, what you need, what you can, because they will not have time to do all the things.
Yeah.
But I think it's a general issue. What we see with research data management is also a lack of knowledge. Even if they knew and they have guidance in relation of, okay, click to DOI, is it working? But then the next guidance for me would be check if published data is fair. And then it's like, what is fair, So I think it's all these kind of really relates. I think one thing is to cite it properly. That's good. They could, most of them can check that, but whether the data that is published is actually reusable, I think that's another challenge. And I don't think neither the editors or reviewers will do that. They do that in some really large journals, but in, I would say, 99% of journals, this is not done. Just as a thought.
If at any point if you're also following the notes and I'm writing notes about something you've said and you think that I haven't correctly framed it, please do feel free to edit my comments. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. It's something that I think about a lot. Like I work with journals, and I should say also, feel free, if you don't want to unmute, you don't want to talk, feel free to put your thoughts straight into the document as well under each of the questions. That's fine as well. Yeah, I think it's a really, really important point that you raised, Irina. I work with journals. I work for a commercial publisher. Hold my hands up to that. And I work with journals, some of which have the budget that we could employ staff to do more checks, and some don't. Even at a commercial publisher, some really don't have that. The money would have to come from somewhere centralized, or it would need to come from overheads that come from other journals. And it's a really important point. And that's why publishers tend to at least when we look at this, we split our journals down into data policies, because the staffing requirement needed on journals that are operating under open and fair is much, much higher than journals operating under other data sharing policies. And so in small community journals, which I also, I know and I work with in different capacities, and that's all being relied on voluntary labor, that's hard. That's really hard, 100%. And I often feel that about Diamond open access journals, because I think it's a fantastic idea in principle, but it relies on everyone having capacity and time, and as you say, knowledge to be able to do those checks on those journals as well. So, and I can see that will be a real crunch point, whereas a commercial publisher does have the resource to train and hire people to do that at a high standard. Yeah, sorry.
To add on this discussion, when you're commenting on Diamond Open Access again in Europe, Operas as a research infrastructure is doing a lot to prepare guidance for Diamond Open Access. And again, SASA is being involved to add recommendations for the data citation. And I think that's also important kind of element that when a guidance comes from really large organization, that it might be taken over by smaller journals. I think this is also something that we could probably look into, if our guidance is embraced with larger organization. So I'll add links to the minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be fantastic. And I think that's kind of one of the things we really want to do here, taking the TNF hat off in terms of, just actually providing help and guidance and actual workable conclusions and recommendations from this working group to try and make this process a little bit better. So if we can, get people connected with guidance and things, I think that would be fantastic. Does anyone have any other thoughts regarding challenges faced by each stakeholder? I mean, I guess the different stakeholders we are thinking of repositories, we're thinking of publishers, we're thinking, I also think as well as publishers, you need to also think about journals and editors, because they're not necessarily all the same thing. And authors, and in some cases funders as well. So if you have any perspectives from any of those standpoints that you want to add, please do. Thank you, Irina. I will stop writing also. It's not confusing. Okay, so what if we think about then some of the, we have discussed problems in the main session. What do we think about solutions to mitigate some of the challenges that we're seeing? So what stakeholders are needed to, I don't think that question makes sense. What stakeholders are needed to implement each solution? What do they need to be able to implement these solutions? Anyone have any thoughts there?
Perhaps coming up with some checklist, a simple checklist that would be usable for editors and publishers, so that they don't have to, that they can more easily implement within their workflow, and improve the fairness of whatever data coming their way as underlying evidence for the publishing articles might help, perhaps.
So sorry, simple checklist for publishers, did you say?
Yeah, simple checklist for publishers and editors as a guidance, what to check to make the data underlying the publication more fair, to check the fairness. without them having a lot of domain knowledge or spending a lot of extra time that they and energy or resources they don't have to improve the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really, really important conclusion that we need to have, an output that we need to have from the group. And I think it's something that we are quite focused on having as an output, is something like that. Oh, thank you. Right. Oh, that's very cool. I did not know about that. I'm sure others in the group did, but I do not. Anyone have any other comments about possible solutions? I think one of the solutions that I hear often, and I heard it also in the in-room comments on the chat, was journals just need to put this in their guide for authors. As much as it pains me to say it, people don't read the guide for authors. It is is a constant source of stress that people do not read the guide for authors. We can put so much information there, and often people will only read it when we point out to them that they have not followed it. So I think it's a very important point, and the idea that journals can be either the carrot or the stick for trying to get this kind of behavior from authors to increase. It's definitely part of it, but I don't think it's all of it. And so I do wonder a little bit if we need to somehow improve author education within institutions. You know, I think that's one of the things that I know when I was a graduate student and a postdoc, I could have benefited from if there was more of this available within my institution to explain to me how I can make my data more fair, how I can, how that would look for publishing a paper when in the publication process I needed to actually start curating my data before I started submitting my paper. Yes, I could have gone and read the journal webpage and realize that, but often at the point that you're doing that, you're already ready to go. And sometimes, to be honest with you, you may miss it if you're young, if you're just starting out, and maybe you haven't got the guidance of a senior PI or someone to guide you, or they don't have the expertise or knowledge to know. So I think, I wonder what other people think of that. I'll just throw that out there for now. Francois, you have a comment?
Yes, my comment on that is that you are very right, but you point at the fact that it's when you were young and learning. So I think it's something we have to push to include in curricula. And, you know, there are also in some places, we were discussing national data services in another session, and there are national data services which organize support to researchers locally. The one in France does that. And it has to be, there is dissemination to do in those places also. But to discuss curricula about opening data and managing data is really a key aspect.
Thank you.
I agree with Answa, like the importance of training, because most of the editors of the journal sometimes no are so related to research or data. So they are more administrative persons of the assistants of the editors, so that they are finally the person that upload information at the platforms. And also, I think that maybe I know there is a certification for data repositories. I don't remember the name in that moment, but something like that, la certification or something that the journals can support that they have best practice in data publication or something like that, like forget.
Okay.
If you know the name of that, Lorena, would you be happy to put it in the notes?
The certification is called Core Trust Seal.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, this is the certification.
That's
Yeah.
for repositories, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but something similar, but for journals, especially nowadays that data articles are very taking power, that are very start to be very famous option for publishing too.
So we
I mean, I
have
think
audio
that's
back for the
that's a really
Zoom
good point,
folks.
and I think some publishers do things like that themselves. There
Same
are
here.
things like, you know, open science badges and things like that that we try to apply to journals that are following these processes. But yeah, it's a good point.
So people on Zoom, we are coming back. We can hear Zoom again, so we're all connected. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone, both in person and online. Zoom folks, sorry to jump into your conversation. If there's any final thoughts, please make sure that you've captured them in the notes document. I think right now we're going to do a little bit of report outs, and maybe we'll put the Zoom people on the spot. And if you want to share a little bit, any high points, key points, we'll give you some space to do that. If anyone wants to unmute or put in the chat your thoughts. Matt, do you want to?
I knew you were going to do that.
Sorry.
No, that's fair. So I think some of the things that we talked about around, for example, challenges that each stakeholders are facing around repositories. One of the points that was pointed out is that some journals in different communities, particularly small journals, diamond open access journals or small society journals or institutional journals, they don't really, unlike commercial publishers or larger publishers, they don't have the budget available for, you know, increasing large amounts of checks, checks on DOIs, checks that data links have been updated and things like that. That relies on people often who are working in another job principally to have even more time and resource and training and knowledge to stick on top of things, to stay on top of things. So that was pointed out as something that's quite difficult. But also that large organizations, just a couple that were linked in our notes, are working to provide recommendations and guidance and training for editors, and so that they can do better in these areas without, you know, having to go and each individually sort of look into this and educate themselves in the limited amount of time that they have. In terms of solutions, we talked about, you know, coming up with checklists for publishers and editors. We talked about the fact that some of this is happening within the publishing community at the minute, and you know, that we are working to map some of this out with Tier 2 and other organizations have been doing huge amounts of work on this already, and it'd be great if we could connect and discuss. So yeah, I think that's a quick summary of what we were chatting about.
And I will just share some of the things, the highlights that we talked about was a need to share the definition of roles across the stakeholders that would help just educate and raise awareness to some of these challenges that we're having. There was also a discussion about the need for automation, that the editors are already overloaded, the need for automation of link checkings. And toward the end of our conversation, we even talked about if there's a need for a role of a data peer reviewer, just like a scholarly publication peer reviewer, kind of a provocative thing there. Let's see, anything else that we want to elevate initially or quickly? We did highlight the work of tier 2 and that, you know, that not to start putting a lot of pressure on tier 2 and the value that it holds, but in, you know, in terms of some of the things they're addressing that could be really relevant for this group, I think there's some really good value in there. Let's see, folks in the room, what else should I be highlighting here? Anything else?
I would like to add a comment if possible. I'm Daniel, I'm online.
Yes, go ahead, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I'm a former scientist and now I'm a data curation officer for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And I'm always wondering about the real commitment journals have with open publishing and sharing data, because we talk about open publishing like a fact that you make, let's say, open articles available and also data available. But if you, for example, you go to, because I'm a lecturer, so I teach research data management, and if you go to Nature Communications journal, for example, which ask scientists to upload raw data, so the data that support the images, none of this raw data is reusable. And apparently nobody cares because there's thousands of articles in the same journal, which data that we cannot reuse as a scientist. So it's data that is occupying a space somewhere in the network, like dragging energetic resources, but it's data that nobody looks at. And if people looks at, it cannot reuse because it can only be understood by the scientists who produce it. So I'm always wondering, like, what's the real commitment beyond saying, okay, we are open access, we provide the raw data, but the real commitment in we are producing something which is valuable for the community, which is curated, and which can be reused. I mean, the previous comment touched upon a point regarding the small journals, but we know that the big publishers have better operational margins than Google, Amazon, and some other companies. They make money, and with that money, I believe it should be a stronger commitment with really producing valuable resources for the whole community.
I really appreciate that comment. Thank you, Daniel. And I think that's one of the reasons that this working group was initiated, was to ensure that if there is disciplinary curation that can happen that adds value to those data that are getting published and underlying the scholarly publication, then we ensure that it, you know, it's stewarded and able to be reused for new research. So I appreciate what you're saying. And Kirsten, maybe you can wrap us up and bring us home here with a final comment.
Yeah, Kirsten again. I think we need to, if it's true that Nature is asking for uploading of the raw data, we have to speak to them, because this can't be. They sign COPTIS, they shall send it to repositories, and I fully understand your review, because if this was raw data submitted to any domain repository, I would ask for at least a summary, a good description and everything. So we should really work towards journals not accepting these uploads of data. That's, I think,
yeah, I can appreciate that. And when they're, for example, in the oceanographic realm, and I'm sure this happens across the geosciences, when there is something like model output and the peer review is of methods to a model, and that model has produced just terabytes of output, it doesn't make sense. We've tried to ask for some type of representative. We'll hold on to that original data, but for the purposes of evaluating fitness for purpose, or for evaluating the veracity of those data as they defend the results in the paper, we ask for something that's either a subset or a summary for just that purpose. So yeah, I think there's some happy medium in there, and I think that that could be a great recommendation as part of this, you know, this broader output. In addition to the output, yeah. It's the summary data or the raw data? Yeah. Yes. So that's the information. Yes. And oftentimes the readers might need this summary, but yeah. I agree. To preserve the. And I think that that is a very, whether the raw data needs to be saved or whether a summary is good enough often rests in the producers community itself. And we right now lend that because we can't determine what that value is. We're not generating that data. We can hold on to it. And oftentimes model runs are so expensive that they are cost prohibitive to run again. And so in those instances, we opt to keep those, but it is storage, but it's also compute time. Sometimes it's compute time. Because rerunning the model is cheaper than storing too many variables. Yeah, and so that's a good kind of topic to push down the road and dig into a little later. And right now, I think we're going to start wrapping up. And I want to just really, we're so very appreciative to hear all of the opinions in the room and the experiences, because I think that's what's really helping us home in on the types of information that would be helpful to all of these stakeholders. So we want to thank everyone online for joining the group, contributing your experiences and your ideas and thoughts. And for those who captured the notes in the file, I really appreciate that. Folks in the room, thank you so very much. And I would encourage you, I don't know if we have the link, but you can find our working group on the RDA website under the ESESI. Oh, well, I think we have our own page now, right? Thanks.
So for those online, I just linked in the chat our RDA working group page. You'll need to log into your RDA account, and then there's a green button where you can hit join group. That will allow you to receive updates maybe once a month currently about our working group meetings and activities, asynchronous activities. So we'll make sure folks in the room have that information as well.
All right, I think that's a wrap for us. Thanks so much, everyone in the room, everyone online. We really appreciate it, and please stay engaged.